What is the fivefold ministry? That's what we're going to be talking about today on Hey there, welcome to my channel. My name is Adam Jordan Clark, and this is a Bible study channel. The three things that we focus on here are history, theology, and spirituality. Basically, what we do is we pick a passage, and then we talk about it, and we're either going to talk about some history, or some theology, or spirituality. And our main goal is to learn about the Bible, because we're a Bible study channel. So if you're interested in learning more about the Bible, gaining more knowledge, and just learning more general information and even more specific information, this is the channel for you. So go ahead and click subscribe now so you never miss a video, because we're publishing a video every single day. But today we are going to be talking about the fivefold ministry, and we're going to be talking about what that actually is. And it comes from a book called Ephesians. Now, one of the things you have to understand about Ephesians is the actual authorship. So when you go to church, most likely your church is going to tell you that Paul, the apostle, wrote about 12, maybe 13 books, or 11 or 12 books of the New Testament. And most of them were letters. And the book of Ephesians is going to be included in that list. The problem, though, is that this is not really what scholars tend to think. The reason why the church goes with it, goes with that answer, is because that's what the church has traditionally believed. And scholars have come to realize that it's not quite that simple. Basically, to level the playing field and explain this in the most simplistic way possible, there are 7 letters in the New Testament that all scholars are certain Paul the Apostle wrote. Those 7 letters are Romans, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Galatians, 1 Thessalonians, and there's 2 more. I can't think of them right now. Philemon and Philippians. Those are the 7 letters that all scholars agree that he wrote. Now, the other ones, like Ephesians and Colossians, and so on, they're kind of disputed, meaning that we're not really quite sure. A lot of scholars are going to say that Paul probably did not write 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, or Titus. But though there are some scholars who do say that he may have wrote them. But generally speaking, most scholars accept the 7 letters of Paul, and the other ones kind of fall into categories. So we're dealing with the book of Ephesians today. And you have to understand that there is some evidence to suggest that Paul wrote this book. On the other hand, there's also some good evidence to suggest that he did not write the book, that perhaps maybe one of his followers wrote this book. Either way, what we're actually talking about when we talk about authorship is we're really talking about Paul himself writing it, either by dictation or writing it with his own hands. We are actually talking about his own authorship. But if we're talking about a follower writing it, that would mean that his follower already knew Paul's teaching, and what he would be doing is reiterating what Paul had already taught somewhere else. Perhaps maybe it comes from a letter that we no longer have. Either way, Paul's authentic teaching is considered to be in Ephesians somewhere in some way. Whether or not he actually wrote it and intended it to be in this letter is a matter of debate. But his ideas are most likely in Ephesians somewhere. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, one of his ideas, which is the idea of the fivefold ministry. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. This is Ephesians chapter 4, verses 1 through 16. And the fivefold ministry starts here in verse 11 and goes all the way down here. And what it basically tells us is what the ministry is, and who is in the ministry, and what the ministry is supposed to do. So here's what it says in verse 11. It says, "So Christ himself gave the apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers to equip his people for works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up until all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God, and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. So there is quite a lot happening here. But first of all, just to go over the basic stuff, the easy way to remember this passage is to hold up your hand and say, there are 5 people, 5 offices of ministry. That would be apostles, prophets, preachers, evangelists, and teachers. The 5-fold ministry. It's easy to remember because you have 5 fingers on your hand. Or if you want to be technical, you have 4 fingers and 1 thumb. Either way, when you stretch out your hand, you get the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the preachers, and the teachers, the 5-fold ministry. And what these offices are designed to do, and they are offices, this is what we tend to think of as not necessarily gifting like you would see in 1 Corinthians, but we view them as offices in terms of occupation, a job occupation of some sort. And what they're designed to do is be some type of clergy or some type of leaders or administrators in the church who oversee what's happening. And so as church had gone on over the past, 2,000 years or so, the church has kind of changed a lot. So we don't really see apostles much anymore. We don't really see prophets much anymore. We really don't see evangelists anymore. And we really don't even see teachers anymore. In fact, I'm actually a teacher. I'm a Bible teacher, and I would probably suspect that I'm one of the first ones that you've probably actually seen on YouTube who actually calls himself a teacher. Most people just kind of call themselves apologists, and I'm not an apologist. I'm a teacher. But most people are familiar with pastors, and pastors are the people who are running churches pretty much. They're mostly senior pastors or associate pastors, or sometimes you have teaching pastors or you have youth pastors. Basically what the word pastor means in the American context of Christianity is you're working for a church or a ministry and you're in some type of leadership role, and so therefore you're considered to be a pastor. It's kind of a universal term. But in the Bible, it's very different. That's not really what a pastor means in the Bible. What a pastor means in the Bible is, first of all, it is a shepherd. It is a person who runs a church and shepherds people, but it's also a person who preaches and teaches to people as well. Teachers are people who teach the Bible, and they teach doctrine, and they teach theology. They teach understanding to people, and they teach wisdom to people, and they teach knowledge to people. What we do here on this channel, actually. Prophets and apostles are probably the most tricky to understand because, number one, we don't have a lot of information in the New Testament about apostles and prophets. We have some bits and pieces of information, but it's really hard to construct or reconstruct what apostles and prophets actually did in the church. But generally speaking, most scholars and most theologians agree that there's a difference between New Testament prophets and Old Testament prophets. Basically, the defining line is that the Old Testament prophets rain down hellfire and brimstone, and the New Testament prophets don't. And so that kind of serves as begs the question, well, what purpose do the New Testament prophets serve if they're not raining down hellfire and brimstone? And this is where things get very complicated because most people just don't know, and there's really no way of knowing because there's no clear evidence in the New Testament as to what prophets are supposed to be doing. We know they prophesy. We're not really sure what they prophesy, though. We don't really know what they serve purposely in the church as. Because you have to remember, we know some stuff about the apostles because the apostles are, Peter, James, John, and Andrew, the people who walked around with Jesus. And there is also some other apostles who were not a part of the 12. They became ordained by the apostles themselves. And so there's different levels of apostles, we know that. But typically apostles are people who, the primary thing that they do is they're actually, what we would probably call them today is a denominational leader or a president or a director of a denomination, meaning that they oversee many different churches, and people come to them with high-end church problems, and they fix those problems and address those issues and help develop doctrine and things of that nature. That's probably the best way to explain what an apostle would be in our time. Now, obviously, there are people in other movements of Christianity who would say otherwise, but generally speaking, this is a good foundation as to what an apostle would do. Prophets, on the other hand, we're not really sure because, again, it's important to understand the 12 apostles were apostles. They were not prophets. So where do prophets come in the New Testament? Well, there's only a handful of examples of prophets being in the New Testament. And those examples do not tell us a whole lot about what prophets did or what prophets are supposed to do. So we really don't know. Teachers, likewise, the same thing. There's really no examples of teachers. And we only have the pastorals, which tell us about being a pastor. So pretty much what we know the most about in terms of the fivefold ministry is pastors, pastoralship, basically people who head churches, senior pastors, and they run churches and shepherd flocks and things like that and teach doctrine and teach out the Bible. That's primarily what the New Testament tells us the most, which is why most people aim to become pastors, or it's something that we talk about the most. If you go to seminary, you train to become a pastor of some sort. You don't go to seminary to be an apostle or a prophet or a teacher or anything like that, or an evangelist. Most of the time, you just go to be a pastor. So to go over the thing real quickly, to remember the fivefold ministry, all you have to do is hold out your hand and say there are apostles, there are prophets, there are preachers, there are evangelists, and there are teachers, and that is the fivefold ministry. We don't know what apostles really did. We don't really know what prophets did. We don't really know what evangelists did. We don't really know what teachers did. All we really know is what pastors did, what preachers did. Very interesting stuff, by the way. So we kind of have to reconstruct what they may have done. But we can confidently say that apostles were probably people who overlooked a series of churches. Prophets were probably people who prophesied inside of those churches, and they were under the leadership of the apostles. Pastors were also under the leadership of the apostles, and they were actually in control of that local church. They directed that local church. Teachers were probably like an assistant pastor of some sort. And evangelists were probably people who trained other people how to evangelize and also went out into the world to evangelize people and eventually bring them back to the church. My name is Adam Jorden Clark. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up, because if you don't like the video, I don't know that you liked it. If something sparked your attention, go ahead and comment that below. Don't forget to subscribe, because I'm publishing a new video every single day on very interesting things in the Bible. So if you want to get that information, you got to click subscribe. And don't forget to get the little bell thing. Click the bell thing, because when you click the bell, it gives you a notification every time I upload, and you can instantly get the video. My name is Adam Jorden Clark, and as always, I will see you in the next video.